Imagine this. You wake up in the dead of night, your mind jolted from a dreamless sleep. The moonlight filters through the window, casting long shadows on the walls of your room. Your breath is shallow, your thoughts fragmented, but one thought cuts through the fog with startling clarity. What is the point of it all? You sit up, feeling the cold sheets against your skin. The world outside is silent, the hum of existence distant, yet your mind churns relentlessly. You begin to question everything. Why do I work so hard every day? Why do I follow routines that lead to nowhere? Why do I try so desperately to make sense of a world that seems indifferent to my existence? As the silence presses in, the question becomes even more urgent. Why do we persist in searching for meaning in a world that may not have any to offer? You've heard the phrase before, life is meaningless, but it's always been something distant, a concept for philosophers, not something that ever truly reached you. But now, in this moment, as you sit in the stillness of the night, it begins to gnaw at you. What if they're right? What if there is no meaning, no inherent purpose, no grand design guiding the steps of humanity or the movements of the stars? And then, in a quiet voice, a darker thought creeps in. If life is truly meaningless, what does that make of me? What does that make of the choices I've made, the paths I've taken, the relationships I've formed, the aspirations I've had? What if all of it is just a series of random events, each of us moving through life like a ship adrift in an ocean of chaos, trying to make sense of waves that have no rhyme or reason? It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? To suddenly realize that the rules we've lived by, the truths we've held dear, might not be the truths at all. That what you thought was purpose might simply be a distraction. But here's the great question. If life is inherently absurd, if meaning is nothing but a fragile construct, then what do we do? How do we live in a world where the search for meaning might be the very thing that condemns us to despair? How do we reconcile the endless pull towards significance with the cold, empty reality that perhaps no significance will ever come? This is not a question that can be easily answered, nor one that can be dismissed. It is the question that haunts every waking moment of our lives, whether we acknowledge it or not. Every relationship we build, every goal we set, every truth we hold onto with fierce determination, all of it is, in one way or another, an attempt to stave off the suffocating weight of nothingness. Yet, at the core of it all, we must confront the truth that even our best efforts might be futile. For what is it to search for meaning in a meaningless world? Is it an act of will, of defiance against the void? Or is it merely another mechanism of the human mind to trick itself into believing there's something more? These are the questions that Jean-Paul Sartre would ask, the questions that pierce the illusion of comfort and expose the raw, unsettling reality of existence. Sartre spoke of the absurdity of life, of the fundamental disconnect between our yearning for meaning and the indifferent universe that offers none. He understood that the search for meaning is a battle that we must fight alone, a battle where no external forces can provide us with an answer, and no higher power can intervene to grant us purpose. But what if that absurdity, that very meaninglessness, is not something to despair over, but something to embrace? What if, in accepting the void, we find the key to creating our own meaning? The questions rise within you, one after another, like waves crashing against the shore. What does it mean to be human in a world where nothing has meaning? What does it mean to search for meaning in the first place? Now, ask yourself this: if life is meaningless, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Will you fall into despair, or will you forge a new path forward? This is not a question that you can avoid. It's not a question that can be drowned out by the noise of daily life. It's a question that waits for you in the quietest moments of your existence, when the distractions fade, and all that's left is the raw, open emptiness of the universe. This, my friend, is where we begin, at the edge of absurdity. The great question, the one that every soul must answer, is this: what now? Pause. Let's breathe in this uncertainty, this tension. Because in embracing it, we might just begin to see a different way forward. You may have been there before, that moment where everything feels hollow, where every goal, every pursuit, and every relationship seems to loop back on itself like an endless maze with no exit. But why does this happen? Why does it feel like we're always reaching for something just beyond our grasp, something we're never sure even exists? The answer lies in the very nature of our existence, the absurdity that Sartre and others have long warned us about. We live in a world where the quest for meaning is an unrelenting force, but for all our efforts, it remains elusive. It's as if we've been programmed to search for something we cannot find. And therein lies the core of the problem. Humans are meaning-making creatures, but we have no inherent meaning in the universe. The very idea that life is absurd stems from the deep disconnect between our desire for purpose and the indifference of the cosmos. Jean-Paul Sartre, a key figure in existential philosophy, famously argued that existence precedes essence. In other words, we are born into a world without preordained meaning or purpose. We exist, and then we must create meaning. This idea, however, places us at the heart of an existential paradox. For in a world that offers no intrinsic value or divine guidance, where does one even begin to build meaning? How do you fill the void with something worthwhile when everything around you whispers that perhaps nothing matters? Sartre's view of the absurdity of life doesn't stop at this realization of emptiness. Instead, he pushes us into confrontation with the paradox that by confronting the void, by understanding that there is no inherent meaning, we have the freedom to create our own. But this is not a comforting freedom. It's terrifying. Sartre acknowledges this stark truth, and it's this confrontation that many of us try to avoid. It's easier, perhaps, to remain distracted, to bury the thought beneath the surface of our busy lives. But that doesn't make it go away. It's a truth that we must either face or live in a kind of self-deception. Let's pause and think about the psychological forces at play here. When we face the possibility of a meaningless existence, it triggers an intense reaction within us. The feeling is known as existential anxiety, the fear that arises when we confront the void, when we feel the absence of any higher meaning. This is a concept explored in depth by existential psychologists like Rollo May and Viktor Frankl, who believe that human beings are driven by an intrinsic need for purpose. But what happens when that purpose seems to be a construct, a fleeting illusion, like smoke in the wind? Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, became one of the foremost proponents of meaning-making after enduring unimaginable suffering. His book Man's Search for Meaning reveals his profound realization: even in the worst conditions, human beings can find meaning, not by seeking some higher external force, but by creating it themselves. Frankl's philosophy aligns with Sartre's, yet Frankl took a more optimistic view. For Sartre, the absurdity of existence was a kind of curse, a burden we must bear alone. For Frankl, though, it was a challenge that could bring us closer to ourselves and to each other. The challenge comes when we realize that meaning is not a gift bestowed upon us by the universe, it must be forged through personal effort and internal conviction. But let's consider the psychological effects of this realization. Frankl talks about the will to meaning, a concept that states our primary drive as human beings is to search for meaning in life. However, when faced with the emptiness of existence, some may respond by experiencing a profound loss of motivation, what Frankl calls the existential vacuum. This vacuum creates an internal void, where the search for purpose turns into a desperate, hollow quest, and can lead to depression, apathy, and nihilism. But why do we experience this existential void so intensely? Why does it weigh so heavily on our minds? It's because, as human beings, we are hardwired to seek patterns, to find structure in the chaos. Cognitive science tells us that our brains are designed to make sense of the world around us, to create narratives out of the randomness of experience. This is a survival mechanism. We seek coherence because it allows us to predict and control our environments. But when the universe refuses to cooperate, when it offers no coherent narrative, no larger purpose, no divine guidance, we are left with a void that no amount of logical reasoning can fill. It's a feeling that philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer described as the will to live, a relentless force that pushes us forward despite the absence of meaning. He argued that life itself is an endless struggle, a cycle of desires that can never be satisfied. And yet, paradoxically, our striving is a constant, an internal drive that seeks meaning, even in the face of meaninglessness. It's like chasing a horizon that recedes as you approach it, always a step out of reach. In this quest, we may encounter further psychological and philosophical complications. The fear of death, another existential concern that Sartre and his contemporaries explored, often fuels our drive for meaning. The awareness of our own mortality, of the fact that we are finite beings living in an infinite universe, can magnify the absurdity of our existence. In one sense, the desire for meaning is a way of deflecting the terrifying prospect of non-existence. If we can create meaning, we can convince ourselves that we matter, that our lives are significant enough to justify the inevitability of our death. But here's where things get even more unsettling. The very desire to avoid confronting death, the drive to find significance, can often trap us in cycles of distraction. We grasp at goals, at relationships, at possessions, anything to fend off the underlying truth that all of this will end. We tell ourselves that these things will provide us with meaning, but deep down, we know the truth, they are temporary. And that temporary nature is what makes it all so fragile. We begin to ask, as Sartre did, why should I bother creating meaning when everything, in the end, will collapse into nothingness? The human struggle, then, is one of two forces pulling us in opposing directions. On the one hand, we crave meaning, purpose, and validation. On the other, we must confront the possibility that no matter how hard we search, we may never find what we're looking for. The pursuit of meaning, it seems, might be just another paradox in the absurdity of existence. But this is precisely where Sartre pushes us, to face the void head-on. To confront the terrifying truth that meaning does not come from the universe, but from us. This brings us to a critical turning point in the exploration of our existence. The only meaning that matters is the one we give ourselves. The absurdity of life, while unsettling, offers a radical freedom. A freedom that is terrifying in its nakedness but liberating in its raw power. And so we return to the question, what now? You've heard it said that ignorance is bliss, but what if the very thing we are trying to avoid, the harsh truths about our existence, are the very forces shaping our lives in ways we can't even see? What if, buried deep in the recesses of our minds, the unresolved tension between our search for meaning and the reality of an indifferent world is silently influencing our every decision, our every relationship, and the very fabric of society itself? The truth is, we often live our lives as if the absurdity of existence is something we can afford to ignore. We go about our routines, pushing the discomfort of existential questions to the back of our minds. But in doing so, we miss how deeply these unresolved questions affect us, subtly and powerfully, shaping our behavior in ways we don't even realize. Consider, for a moment, the subtle impact of this hidden struggle on your daily life. You might wake up, go to work, and interact with others, all while a persistent, unspoken fear of meaninglessness lurks in the background. And yet, this fear doesn't always come in the form of explicit thoughts. Instead, it manifests in the small decisions, the ones you don't give much thought to but that accumulate over time and define the course of your life. Think of how you structure your days. We often prioritize productivity and efficiency, driven by the underlying belief that doing more, achieving more, will somehow validate our existence. This is where the unseen consequences of existential anxiety become apparent. We engage in the constant pursuit of success, recognition, and accomplishment, not because these things are inherently fulfilling, but because we've been conditioned to believe that they are the antidote to our underlying existential discomfort. We feel that by creating external markers of success, we can prove to ourselves that our lives matter. But this creates an endless cycle. The more you accomplish, the more you realize that you're still left with an insatiable void. The achievements, the accolades, the things that were once supposed to bring satisfaction, no longer provide the comfort they once did. In fact, they might even amplify the sense of emptiness, because they are, in the end, external markers that do not touch the core of the existential dilemma. This existential anxiety is also closely tied to our relationships. In a society that prizes individual success, we often come to see relationships as a means of validation. We seek out friendships, romantic partners, and even family connections not just for the companionship they offer, but because they reinforce our sense of purpose. The thought might not be consciously articulated, but we often think, if others value me, then I must be worthwhile. But the paradox is that by relying on others for validation, we fall into a trap of dependency. We begin to seek out relationships that serve our need for external affirmation rather than fostering true connection and love. And as Sartre points out, this othering, where we define ourselves based on how others perceive us, only deepens the feeling of alienation. When we fail to see that relationships are not about seeking meaning from others, but about creating meaning together, we end up in a cycle of insecurity and self-doubt. These unconscious patterns extend beyond personal relationships and into larger societal structures. In the pursuit of external markers of meaning, societies often structure themselves around systems that promote productivity and individual achievement at the expense of individual fulfillment. Think about the way modern capitalism is built. Its very foundation rests on the idea that individual success, through wealth, status, or power, equates to fulfillment. This has led to a culture obsessed with progress, growth, and consumption. But in the process, the true question of meaning, what it means to be fulfilled, to be truly alive, has been overshadowed by the need to achieve more, to produce more, to be more. This societal framework has pervasive consequences. People feel pressured to fit into a mold that doesn't align with their true needs or desires. The fear of failure, the relentless push to be someone they are not, leaves little room for existential reflection. The culture of perpetual productivity and competition subtly reinforces the very existential angst it cannot resolve. People are told to do more, but they are never told how to be more in the existential sense. Beyond the individual, there are broader societal ramifications to this unacknowledged struggle. Nations and cultures that are fixated on success and achievement are often caught in cycles of conflict and competition, as nations battle for resources, recognition, and power. But behind these external struggles lies a deeper, unspoken battle, a collective yearning for meaning. The pursuit of power, influence, and territory becomes, at some level, a desperate attempt to impose meaning on a world that refuses to offer it. Take, for example, the phenomenon of mass consumerism. We are sold the idea that by acquiring more, whether it's the latest technology, the newest fashion, or the most luxurious experience, we can fill the void within. Yet, when the newness fades, when the temporary thrill of acquisition dissipates, the void reappears, often leaving people feeling emptier than before. This cycle, driven by a collective need for meaning in a meaningless world, reinforces the very absurdity we are trying to escape. Consumerism, in this sense, becomes a manifestation of our desire to escape the existential void by distracting ourselves with things that promise fulfillment, but ultimately fail to deliver it. The truth is, these unseen consequences aren't just philosophical or abstract, they are very real, very psychological, and they shape the way we live, think, and interact with the world. From the very fabric of our personal lives to the structures of society itself, the absence of inherent meaning leaves an indelible mark. And yet, it is this very absence that we must confront if we are ever to move beyond the existential vacuum. This is where the tension lies. We are trapped in a system of perpetual distraction and achievement, constantly striving for more, but never satisfied. And it's not just about what we do, it's about how we think about what we do, how we make meaning out of it, and the price we pay for believing that meaning is something to be acquired rather than created. The societal forces that keep us running in this endless cycle of consumption and competition are not just economic, they are psychological, philosophical, and existential in their roots. So, here we are, standing on the precipice of realization. The unseen consequences of our existential struggle are everywhere, woven into the very fabric of our lives, our relationships, and our cultures. But it is only by acknowledging them, by seeing the absurdity of it all, that we can begin to break free. In the next section, we will explore how this struggle is not just something to be endured, but something to be embraced. How we might find freedom not in avoiding the absurd, but in confronting it head-on. How we can begin to create our own meaning, in defiance of a world that offers us none. The rebellion is not one of passive resignation, but active, radical creation. And that is where the true freedom lies. You've come to the edge, where the cold realization of meaninglessness looms larger than ever. The absurdity of existence is no longer an abstract concept, it's something you feel deep in your bones. It's not a distant theory in a dusty philosophy book, it's real, palpable, and pressing against you. You are alive in a universe that offers no clear answers, no inherent purpose. And now, the question arises once again, what do you do with this truth? The first instinct might be to recoil, to turn away from the rawness of the void, to push back against the harshness of reality. To bury the existential truth beneath the weight of distractions, of routine, of the constant buzz of achievement. But what if this instinct to run from the absurd is not the way forward? What if, instead of running, you should be embracing it? What if in accepting the absurdity, you could break free? The paradox of the absurd, as Sartre so powerfully demonstrated, is that the moment you stop fighting it, the moment you stop trying to make the world fit into a neat little box of meaning, you actually gain the freedom to create your own meaning. In embracing the absurd, you are no longer a passive participant in a world that imposes meaning upon you, you become the creator of your own existence, the architect of your purpose. And this, my friend, is where the rebellion begins. For too long, we have been conditioned to believe that meaning is something we find outside ourselves, something that is given to us by society, religion, or some cosmic force. We chase after it, we search for it, believing that once we find it, our lives will finally be validated. But what if, instead of searching, we began creating meaning? What if the very act of existence itself, with all its absurdity, was the foundation upon which we could build something entirely new? Think about this. The moment you stop relying on external forces to provide you with meaning, you open up a vast horizon of possibilities. The absurdity of the universe no longer becomes a burden, it becomes an invitation. It's as if the universe itself is saying, there is no meaning. There are no rules. So go ahead, create your own. This is the heart of Sartre's philosophy, radical freedom. He believed that we are condemned to be free, meaning that once we recognize the absence of inherent meaning in the world, we are faced with the incredible, terrifying responsibility of creating our own. But this freedom is not a gift, it's a challenge. It's not a license to live in chaos, but an invitation to craft a life that is meaningful on our own terms. This is a rebellion of sorts, against the world's expectations, against the societal pressures, against the need to conform to a predetermined idea of success and fulfillment. But it's not a rebellion born of anger or defiance for the sake of defiance. It's a rebellion rooted in creation. A refusal to let the absence of meaning be an excuse for passivity. It's the refusal to let the absurdity of life be the reason you give up. Instead, it's the belief that within the void, there is potential, the potential for you to shape something uniquely your own. Consider Viktor Frankl again. His approach to meaning was not about passively accepting life as it came, but about choosing how to respond, no matter the circumstances. Frankl didn't just survive the Holocaust, he created meaning out of the suffering he endured. This wasn't some grand, cosmic meaning that was handed to him, it was a deeply personal, internal meaning that arose from his response to the absurdity of his situation. He chose to find purpose in the most unimaginable circumstances, not because life was inherently meaningful, but because he gave it meaning. Frankl's resilience comes not from accepting the world's meaninglessness, but from actively confronting it. He understood that while we may not control the external circumstances of our lives, we always have the power to choose how we respond to those circumstances. This is the radical freedom that Sartre speaks of, but Frankl takes it a step further. He connects it to our deepest human need for purpose. This rebellion against meaninglessness doesn't require grand gestures or monumental actions. It starts with small, personal decisions to act in ways that reflect your own values and vision. It's in the choice to live authentically, to pursue the things that matter to you, rather than to conform to society's expectations. It's about rejecting the idea that you must find purpose in external validation and realizing that true freedom comes when you create your own purpose. Take the example of artists, inventors, and innovators throughout history. The great minds of humanity were not those who sought to fit into the established molds of their time. No, they were the rebels, the ones who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. The painters who created masterpieces because they saw beauty in the chaos of life, the inventors who brought new ideas into the world because they refused to accept the limitations of their time, the writers who challenged societal norms because they saw the possibility of a better world. These individuals didn't wait for meaning to be handed to them, they made it. This kind of rebellion is not easy. It requires courage to look at the world in all its rawness and say, I choose to create something beautiful, something meaningful, even if the universe offers none of that to me. It requires the bravery to live authentically, even when the world tells you to conform. But this, I believe, is where true freedom resides, not in the absence of meaning, but in the act of creating it, even against the odds. You might think, but what if my creation is flawed? What if it's all pointless in the end? And here's the answer, that's the beauty of it. In a meaningless world, there is no right or wrong, no ultimate judgment. The only thing that matters is that you are creating. In embracing the absurd, you embrace your own power to shape your life. You are no longer a passive observer of existence, you are the artist, the creator, the one who chooses what the world will mean. And so, the rebellion is not against life itself, but against the force that tells you life must have a prescribed meaning. The rebellion is about freedom, the freedom to make your own path, to live your life in a way that feels true to you, no matter what the universe has to offer. This is where you begin to truly break free, not by denying the absurdity, but by accepting it and using it as the fuel for your own creation. This is the power that lies within you, to reject the shackles of external meaning, to create your own purpose, and to live as a true expression of your freedom. This is the rebellion that no one can take from you. The next section will reveal the ultimate truth that comes from this radical shift in perspective. What does it mean to fully embrace the absurdity of existence and emerge transformed? How does this rebellion redefine the way we live, think, and experience the world? That is the journey we will explore in the next chapter. You've lived the rebellion. You've taken the absurdity of existence and, instead of retreating from it, you've confronted it, chosen to create meaning where there once was none. You've stopped searching for external validation and embraced the terrifying freedom that comes from creating your own purpose. But now, with that freedom in your hands, the next question arises, what do you do with it? Here, at the precipice of this rebellion, you may expect a sudden surge of clarity, a grand revelation that explains everything, a moment where all the threads come together in a neat, satisfying conclusion. But that's not the ultimate truth. The truth you're about to uncover is not neat, nor is it something that will grant you complete peace or resolve. It's something deeper, something more profound than simply having answers. It's an understanding that, in the end, the search for meaning is the meaning. This is where the paradox comes full circle. The universe, in its vast indifference, will never offer us meaning. But in that very void, in the face of that overwhelming emptiness, we find the power to give our lives meaning. The ultimate truth is that the meaning we seek was never going to be handed to us. It was always within our grasp, ready to be created by us, through our choices, our actions, and our ability to live authentically. The realization is this: meaning is not found, it is made. The great cosmic riddle does not have an answer, and the sooner you accept that, the sooner you realize that the question itself was never the point. The point was always about how you engage with that question, how you choose to create a life that is filled with purpose, no matter the universe's refusal to provide it. It is the act of creating meaning that gives life its value. This truth might seem simple, but it is profound in its implications. It liberates you from the shackles of expectation and judgment. No longer are you a slave to the definitions of success and fulfillment imposed by society or by others. In this new understanding, you are free to define your own terms. You are free to create a life that feels meaningful to you, regardless of how the world at large might perceive it. You are the creator of your own existence. Take a moment to truly absorb this. You live in a world that is absurd, a world that offers no inherent meaning. But rather than drowning in despair, you realize that this absurdity is the canvas upon which you can paint your own story. You are no longer constrained by the weight of an external narrative, you are writing your own. This is not the end of the journey, it is only the beginning. Once you understand that meaning is made, not found, you begin to see everything differently. Life no longer has to be something to be endured or simply survived. It becomes a creative act, an ongoing project in which you are the author. You are free to explore, to experiment, and to craft your existence in ways that reflect your truest desires and values. But this freedom is not something that can be taken for granted. It is not a one-time revelation, it must be continuously nurtured. Each day, you must choose to live authentically, to embrace the paradox of existence, and to engage with the absurdity not as a burden, but as a liberating force. The truth is that the quest for meaning is not a singular destination, it's a process, a journey of continuous creation. You might think back to the earlier parts of this exploration, when you were grappling with the question of what to do with a meaningless world. And now, looking back, you can see it clearly. The absence of meaning was never the problem, it was the catalyst for your own transformation. The void left by the world's indifference became the space in which you could begin to construct your own meaning. This realization changes everything. It means you are no longer bound by the need to find the answer, because there is none. The ultimate truth is that there is no final resolution, no neatly tied up conclusion to the riddle of existence. The beauty lies in the creation, in the act of continually shaping your life as an expression of your unique self. Your existence itself becomes a work of art, constantly evolving, constantly unfolding. This is the ultimate freedom. The ability to look into the void and, rather than be paralyzed by it, to fill it with your own creation. To embrace the absurdity and to say, I will make my meaning. I will live authentically. I will be the one who defines what is worthwhile. And as you stand here, at the edge of this realization, something shifts within you. You begin to see the world with new eyes, not as a place of endless questions that can never be answered, but as a canvas, vast and open, waiting for you to leave your mark. The absurdity of life becomes your most powerful ally, a source of endless potential, because it's no longer something to resist or fear, it is something to embrace. The final truth that emerges from this journey is simple, yet deeply profound. The meaning of life is not to be found. It is to be created. And it is through this act of creation that you will discover what it truly means to live a meaningful life. So go forward, with this ultimate truth in your heart. You are the creator of your own meaning. You are the master of your existence. And in the face of the absurd, you are free. The journey of embracing the absurd is a never-ending one. With each day, each moment, you have the opportunity to reinvent yourself, to redefine your purpose, and to leave your mark on the world. And in doing so, you may just come to realize that the quest for meaning was never about finding the answer, it was about the creative act of living itself. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful truth of all.